So, dear friends, so welcome to our lunch debate. I guess one could say that if you think back, that the first time when really Georgia was a hot topic in Brussels discussion, it was, I would say, more than 10 years ago, during the times of Rose Revolution. Before that, from outside perspective, Georgia did seem like a country with a lot of problems, economic challenges, administration which was pretty much Soviet style, very high corruption, and in fact, to be honest, the country was seen as a concentration of the criminal organizations of that region, or part of Europe. 2003, things changed. After the demonstration and after the Shevardnadze's administration had to resign, something very extraordinary and inspirational, in fact, happened, at least for us looking from distance. Saakashvili's team came in, Western educated, very dynamic, with ambition, grabbed the country and put to a new direction with a very strong reforms which really gave results. Just to give some example, in corruption, we just mentioned corruption in Georgia. In fact, Georgia was considered the most corrupted place in post-Soviet space. And only in 6-7 years, in fact, Georgia was considered less corrupted than some of the EU member states. In tax collection, Georgia was doing very poorly. In 2003, its collection of tax revenue was 13% of the GDP. Only 1 year later, it was 20, and later it was over 3 times. The tax revenue was over 3 times what it was before. At the same time, the average tax level was one of the lowest in the world. Public administration reforms, education reforms, the employees of public sector went down to half. Very, very, very impressive results. And I mentioned just this, just as a little bit of reminder that how the expectations, perspective on Georgia only some years ago were very different than I would say they are today. In any case, 2012 there was parliamentary elections, 2013 presidential elections, and new powers came to Georgia. And the hope was that this new administration, new government would embrace the democratic values and democratic practice. And that's what we all hope. And well, I'm sure we'll discuss today, but unfortunately, it didn't work that way fully. We have many cases of many accusations of selective justice and using the justice system against the opposition and against the former government. Svante Cornell, our research associate, made a paper some more than a year ago, Getting Georgia Right. We have actually run out of copies, but you can still download it and you can have the e-book. I think it's very relevant still today for understanding the current developments or seeing current developments in Georgia. But one of his points was at that point that really Georgia is at crossroads both as a democratic country and as a European country. And so taking that to account and taking into account the last couple of weeks developments, dismissal of the Minister of Defense, changes in the government, all that includes involvement into Russia, and all this together. What is really the status of democracy in Georgia? What are the future scenarios? What is the EU's role in that? And what is Georgia's European future? For that discussion, we have an outstanding panel. I think also the amount of participants, your audience, kind of proves that. We are looking forward to a very interesting discussion. The panelists will be presented by Roland Freudenstein, Deputy Director, who will also moderate the debate. So I want to thank the panelists for coming. So the audience, I also want to mention Salome Samanashvili, our ambassador, now visiting fellow who actually made this this meeting to be able to happen. So welcome very much, and Roland, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Tommy, and welcome from my side as well to everyone here. Before I introduce the panelists, there's one person I would like to welcome particularly, is Ilka Kishelashvili, former foreign minister of Georgia, now working for a think tank and passing by in Brussels. Thank you for coming as well. And many, many other friends and long-standing colleagues. So welcome to everyone. I'd like to present our panel now. We have two guests from Georgia, children of the Rose Revolution, if I may say so. And with their youthful looks, No. With their youthful looks, I'm still entitled to say that. Here to my right, Georgi Kandelaki, who was first elected to Parliament, to the Georgian Parliament in 2008. He's now on his second term. He is the deputy chair of the European Integration Committee in Parliament. Before he was elected to that Parliament, he was a journalist and a civic activist. I then would like to welcome Giga Bukeria, second on my left, who is the International Secretary of the United National Movement, UNM. Of course, Georgi also comes from that party. So we have two guests from UNM. Giga is the International Secretary. He has been a member of Parliament and was his last post until November last year was Secretary of the National Security Council. He resigned from that post, and he's also been a negotiator in Geneva for Georgia. Then we have a representative of the EPP group, Gunnar Hökmark, who I would say, with his knowledge about economics and his usual preaching about deregulation, and at the same time his involvement and his advocacy of freedom in the East, is the embodiment of the meaning of 89, as I called it recently in a blog.
I don't know what to say about that.
It's political and economic freedom and their mutual interdependence. So welcome, Gunnar. Gunnar is in the EPP group also responsible for neighborhood policy, and that will certainly be another topic that we're going to talk about today here in the context of Georgia and Georgia's EU relations. And last but by no means least, Rudy Filon from the External Action Service, who has held several posts in the European Commission, first in DG Relex, I assume it was, and has been posted to Japan twice in his diplomatic career, and is now a team leader, the team leader for relations with the Republic of Moldova and Georgia in the External Action Service. So welcome to all of you. And I'd like to make one more remark. This event is live streamed, so there are no Chatham House rules here. All this goes out into the global sphere. I think we have some evaluation forms for you to fill out. If you have the time, if you find the time, please evaluate the event as it was from your perspective when you leave. Now, Georgi, I would like to start with you. Can you give us an update of the situation in your home country? What is happening at the moment?
Thank you, Mr. Freudenstein. It's an honor to be here, and I'll very quickly try to give you some couple of bullet points of most recent developments and what they really mean for Georgia and trajectory of Georgia. Many of you might have heard that recently the foreign policy team, so to speak, of the current Georgian government resigned, or the leader of that team, Defense Minister Al-Assad, was fired. As they said, they resigned over concerns that the country's foreign policy course was being threatened. So that's the premise on which the foreign policy team of the Georgian government resigned, people who would often come here and defend the government of Mr. Ivanishvili. some details here are instructive. First, the way that happened, 5 associates of Mr. Alassania, the defense minister, were arrested, upper middle level officials of the Ministry of Defense, in a way that he was cornered, so to speak, on some alleged corruption charges, but then the cases are classified, so the lawyers cannot access them yet. Mr. Ivanishvili, who we once again saw that the former prime minister, who the oligarch, who resigned at the end of 2013, but very much remains the power holder of the Georgian government. The current prime minister is former family assistant. He went live on TV and demonstrated in-depth knowledge of these cases that are classified, that even lawyers cannot access them. Yet, Mr. Ivanishvili, who is an unauthorized person, we saw enjoys full access. I would argue that this most recent development highlights three things, so to speak. First, it's these arrests and a few other people were charged in the defense ministry, and 25 new cases emerged recently against Mr. Alassania, and we heard also that on the meeting of the political council of the Georgian Dream, where Mr. Alassania went together with his sort of allies, he was met there by Mr. Ivanishvili himself, who told him that threatened him with arrest. So this highlights 3 things, I believe. First, it reinforces earlier claims about the abuse of criminal justice system in Georgia and the selective justice. Because again, the people who would come here to this and other important capitals and argue that there is no selective justice in Georgia, that it's just the rule of law, and all these arrests of former officials and leaders of the opposition are caused by whatever crimes and so on. Now these same people are saying that they are the victims of selective justice. So the question is, when were they disingenuous? Now or before? The second thing that, as I already mentioned, this new development highlights or re-highlights is this informal rule thing, so to speak, that Mr. Ivanishvili is indeed in charge, not just in charge, but I mean, it's the main power holder, so to speak, of the Georgian government, and he does it in a very public way. He says that. One thing he said once about the prime minister is that he's a good guy. He doesn't need to be told twice, so to speak. So that's a problem. That's a systemic problem for somebody who doesn't hold any office, who is entirely outside the constitutional framework, to be not just the power holder, I mean, the important person, but the power holder. That's a problem for democracy because he doesn't face any accountability. And the third sort of summary point that this development highlights is that these recent events mark deepening of backsliding of Georgian democracy. Because until now, what do we have? We have a situation in which the entire leadership of the main opposition party is either already in jail, in pre-trial detention. That's another footnote that most people are in pre-trial detention. Putting political figures in pre-trial detention per se is a no-go in European practice, because by virtue, I mean, politicians, they take part in political life, so they don't have any intention to run away, so there's no need to put them in pre-trial detention, even if there is an alleged crime. So they are either already in jail, or under investigation, or in exile. The almost entire leadership of the party, and you also have now a recent development. Senior officials have said, and Prime Minister, Interior Minister, that there is a case against the party as such, as they said. I mean, so they clarified the legal detail under which article alleged attempt to overthrow the government. So this is the rhetoric, the terminology, that are from another sort of world, so that people wouldn't hear from Georgia. So one step Before, so to speak, we had important local elections, which were important in a number of ways. In June 2014, June this year, for our party, these elections were important because we not only, despite these arrests and prosecutions, registered strong second. In some areas we improved considerably, and we improved in urban areas, and in the capital, which was never our stronghold, UNM forced the second round, which made the oligarch angry, and he arrested former mayor, first ever directly elected mayor of Tbilisi, and our campaign manager, Gigi Gulava, 5 days before the second round. So he's still in pre-trial detention. And also the number of other things that we saw at these elections that Georgian democracy had not seen in recent years. Things like candidates campaigning from jail. We had three major candidates who were imprisoned in winter, February, when they declared wish to run, and were in pre-trial detention, are still in pre-trial detention, so some of them, and including our top scorer, Mr. Jibukhai and Khoni, who got sort of most votes of all the UNM candidates, 45% from jail. And all of them were arrested for alleged minor administrative white-collar abuse, not personal enrichment, dating several years back. And we also had 25 candidates withdrawing after they registered, so as a result of well-documented police pressure. So to sum up, we have this clear trajectory that some people call the Yanukovychization of Georgia. The government abusing justice system, cracking down on opponents, imprisoning major political figures at all levels, local level, national level, and saying it's rule of law. We have nothing to do with that. And I think one thing Ukrainian experience shows, and I'll end with that, is that baselining of democracy does have geopolitical consequences. That if democratic political system is being dismantled, instead of taken to another level, consolidation, that inevitably benefits agenda of Mr. Putin. And so that's something to be kept in mind, and I think we will return during the discussion. So I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Georgi. I will now turn to Giga and ask him about the wider implications, actually the point that Georgi just finished up with. What is the geopolitical context? What is Russia's role in all this? And how do these events, this backsliding, impact Georgia's relations with the European Union? From Georgi.
Thank you so much. I want to join Georgi in thanking the Martens Centre, all the organizers for this wonderful opportunity to touch base and discuss the very critical moment for Georgia's democracy and Georgia's European future. And when I say this critical moment, I don't mean necessarily last 2 weeks, as it's automatically considered sometimes because we have a political crisis with key ministers fired or resigning, but I mean this phase of our democracy. And as all of you, at least most of you know, as it was already described as, the political party that I belong to, the political team that I was part of, Georgi, was voted out 2 years ago. For those who have been in politics, they know how bitter and unpleasant it is to be defeated in elections, and I can only confirm that. But on the other hand, I think there has been, and there still is, a very clear understanding that this was a historic moment for Georgia's democracy and European future, because it's inevitable. If one is going in the direction of European liberal democracy, a government must be defeated in a poll. Otherwise, it's impossible to call it a democracy. It was a peaceful transfer of power. It was a bitter campaign, but completely peaceful process, and it was crucial precedent for Georgian democracy. So one can say, by both academic analysis or practical knowledge, the first important test to become a full-fledged liberal democracy was passed. Power was changed through voters. Now, we all knew, and now we see it unfortunately very vividly, that this is an important test, but not sufficient one. So one. Because the next important test of liberal democracy is that the winners accept the simple truth that those who lost continue to compete in democratic systems, do not disappear, do not go automatically to jail by the very virtue of a defeat, and cannot be disqualified just because they are politically disliked or allegedly some members of its team or really committed a crime. And here, unfortunately, my country is failing the test due to the policies of new government, particularly the former Prime Minister, whom Georgi described in detail, his de facto control of the situation, which per se is a problem of democracy, big one also. This disqualification has manifested itself in concrete actions, which again were enumerated here, but was also very transparently declared. So I want to highlight that because it's obvious that I'm not the most neutral observer of the situation, where my party leaders and myself are under investigation or in jail. But to highlight what we mean is that public declarations by former and current Prime Minister, numerous high-ranking public officials, shed a light on what is the doctrine. And the doctrine is that immediately after the victory, Mr. Ivanishvili, the former Prime Minister, who got the mandate of the voters, made it very clear by saying that the number of arrests will depend on UNM behavior, on UNM retort. And that was a public statement repeated over and over for domestic audience, and then even for international audience in his famous interview in Le Monde newspaper. So when we hear the rationalization of the prosecutions by the government that it's merely a rule of law issue, and nobody should be above the law, which we all subscribe to. On the other hand, we, in typical Orwellian style, have this double talk, have a clear message what real reasons are. The real reasons are that the new government disqualifies morally, politically, its opponents from a competition. That's where all the next actions come from. That's where they derive from. And obviously, as we have unfortunately foreseen, this has not been solely focused on the United Nations movement, though we are primary target. Anybody who makes the government unhappy, anybody who's considered a political threat, can become a target. And we have seen Mr. Alassani, Minister of Defense, one of the most popular politicians inside the government, become the next victim of this targeted campaign. Now, I want to make clear, Mr. Alassani is no political friend of UNM. He's a rival, he's a competitor, and will stay like that probably on many issues. But this is not the issue. The issue is, what is the course that government takes to engage in political competition? And as Georgiev described, so far what we have seen, this is the course of pretrial detentions, selective justice, those who will shut up or switch the political sides, the cases will be dropped. Those who will disturb the government will go to jail. This is as simple as that. And here I go to your question. It's a long introduction, I'm sorry about that, but it's an important aspect of that. We come here at a very critical moment. And as we speak, we all see that Russian tanks are pouring further into the Ukrainian territory. And we all know that the future of Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, the whole region, or the next enlargement of the free world is at stake. And we all know that for Georgia, the Russian aggression is the major threat for our existence, sovereignty, and liberty. We are very glad that association agreement, this highly symbolic document of the Ukraine crisis, has been ratified by Georgian government, and hopefully it will be ratified by European Parliament soon. It's a technical document. It's not a foreign treaty, the association agreement, but it became highly symbolic due to Russian actions in Ukraine. And so far, we believe that Georgian government does not, but Georgian people deserve to make this important step. The key issue is the European choice is not about even very important documents like association agreement, which is a benchmark of like social changes and how we should do it. It's about real transformation back home. It's about the civilization of choice, the choice of what kind of political system we will have. As Georgi said, it will be impossible just to make foreign policy statements which are pro-Western, while jailing political opponents at home and labeling them as traitors and part of international conspiracy, as we have seen very recently about Mr. Alassani. He's been labeled as traitor and UNM stooge. It's completely impossible if the Georgian Prime Minister thinks that Lithuanian Prime Minister or Swedish Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, or National Democratic Institute of America are part of international conspiracy to undermine Georgian government, which she said publicly several times, that this road will lead to Europe. Because becoming part of Europe is not about checkbook on the paper or press conferences or messages which are clear that we want to join Europe, which, as Georgi rightly noted, Yanukovych at the beginning made the same statements. It's about accepting the European way of life and democratic rules of the game at home. And last but not least, and then we can explore this topic. So my short point is that if there is no democratic transformation at home, this road leads to Putin, not to Europe. There are direct links with security and Russia issues of this current political crisis and general democratic backsliding. What we have seen in the last 2 years is not only this typical Kremlin rhetoric of labeling Western institutions and Western figures as enemies of Georgian state, not only labeling NGOs, domestic NGOs of Georgia, who were very critical of previous government, by the way, very critical. But when they criticize the new one, they are labeled as subversive agents. It's not only this deliberate distancing from Ukrainian case by Georgian government, decoupling Ukrainian case from Georgia, as Georgian Prime Minister said, there is nothing in common of our problems and Ukrainian problems, as loud as a BBC interview. But we see an upsurge of mushrooming far right, far left, it doesn't matter in this case, extremist groups inside the country who push a violent agenda, so they commit violence with complete impunity. Their ideology is very well-calculated way, I would say, hopefully not very successful, but well-calculated way, targeted against the European idea. And the idea is that Europe is not offering security, Russia is a threat, we must adjust to this situation, and plus, Europe provides a challenge to our identity and our values. Russia is an Orthodox brother. We see those groups committing violence throughout these 2 years in the country. We see those groups overlapping with ruling party grassroots structures everywhere in the country. We see them being endorsed by Prime Minister on various levels over and over again. This is a best gift for foreign enemy to have attention on sectarian level with religious minorities, ethnic minorities inside the country. We have seen how Russia has used it previously in the 90s, and we know that this is a direct threat to our national security now. So, departure of the most pro-Western part of the coalition from the ruling coalition, continued political prosecutions, surge in sectarian violence promoted or / tolerated by the top leadership, all accompanied by just statements of European choice. That all boils down that Georgia is backsliding from its European choice, its democracy and European future is at risk. Unless we manage, first of all, we back home as democratic opposition and Georgian public to slow down this course or reverse it eventually, with the help of our side friends, of course, or we are facing the very dangerous future, bearing in mind that outside adversary will use all the weaknesses of Georgian democracy for its purposes. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Giga Bokeria. I'd like to turn now to Udi Filon from the External Action Service, and what should be the European Union's reaction to these events? And isn't Georgia just one example of a massive failure of the so-called Eastern Partnership strategy, Eastern Partnership Initiative, as it was put on track in 7 years ago by the European Commission?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a challenging question, and but I think the previous speaker already mentioned the importance that we are facing in this part of the world. It's our neighborhood. We cannot afford to disengage and just go home and say, okay, it's not our problem anymore, because it is. And if we don't continue our engagement, the problem will only increase. So, is there a future for the Eastern Partnership? Well, definitely there is. Is there a future for it in its current format? It is clear that we need to rethink, we need to reformulate, we need to draw conclusions from the areas where we possibly could have done better, where we possibly could have done things differently. But clearly, we have to continue. The whole differentiated approach is one of the elements that we will continue. That is for sure. Georgia and the Republic of Moldova, for that matter, are both in the top league when it comes to their as partners of the association agreement. The implementation is going smoothly so far. It's still very early. But of course, we have not missed the fact that there was a political crisis. The political crisis also internally in the EU gave rise to a number of very pointed questions. What does this mean? What are we? Is the whole coalition falling apart? Is this more a matter of internal power struggle? You hear there are tensions within the coalition, which in itself we thought was not particularly worrisome, because there are often tensions in any coalition, in any democratic system. So as such, that should not worry us too much. It's more what is the outcome of that tension? What happens? I think the EU has consistently been passing the message that it does not accept selective justice, and we have been very clear and very firm on this. One of the messages that we have always been passing is to say, if you have no opposition, you have no democracy. It cannot exist. And the whole issue of selective justice is an important point on which we continue to engage the government. We have, of course, been given explanation, but on a number of issues. But we have time and again pointed at the fact that when you look at the people targeted in that process, it happens to always be political opponents. So as a result, you ask yourself the question: this cannot be. What is behind this? This cannot be. This cannot be a coincidence. So overall, we have been receiving assurance from the new government, from the government and the new ministers coming in, that there is no diversion from Georgia's course for Euro-Atlantic integration. And that is of course something that we will further develop with the country in the very first place next Monday, when we have the first meeting of the EU-Georgia Association Council. And these points are high on the agenda. We will not take things at face value in that respect. And we will continue to very closely monitor, also through our delegation on the ground in Georgia, what is happening. The whole role of civil society in all this is extremely important. Also because we see that in a number of areas there has been pure misinformation about what it means to associate with the EU. When you read things about if you associate with the EU, de facto you accept gay marriage. I think that is probably one that is a conclusion that cannot be supported by the country, for instance. And there are many such cases, and we have also seen this in other countries. And it's something that we try to counter by reaching out as much as possible, by explaining our positions time and again, also at local level, and that we think is extremely important for our communication. So coming back to your initial question, we should definitely continue, but we should not be blind for and be prepared to draw conclusions from what has happened so far and where we should go.
Well, thank you, Hudi, but I'm afraid I'm still I'm still confused, though on a much higher level. What exactly is the European Union going to do? Is it going to withdraw payments? Is it going to enact some kind of conditionality in case these cases of selective justice continue? What is going to be the consequence of this? I mean, to mention it at the EU-Georgia Association Council is very valid. It's fine. We all know it's going to happen. But then what if it continues?
Well, obviously, at some point, one has to draw conclusions from the situation as it develops, and we can only hope that we will not reach that point. But of course, we will ask ourselves the question there and then: what will we do? But we will not just continue in a kind of business as usual mode when we get clear and unequivocal evidence that things are going the wrong way in the country.
Okay, let me now turn to Gunnar Hökmark. Maybe you can solve the riddle. I mean, what is going on in your view in Georgia now, and how should the EU react?
Thank you. One way of replying to that is to say that I'm very happy to see Giga and Georgia here. It's a special dimension welcome to this. It's good to see that you're still free. And I think this is in some way an important response to your question, because we need to see that there is something very obscure going on in Georgia. I saw on a travel some weeks ago a whole page advertisement in Financial Times, I think it was. In New York Times. Okay, sorry. I'm trying to a whole page where the Speaker of the Georgian Parliament is advocating the case of the man without power, saying that he has not made any wrongs and he's not in power, and what he has done with power is good. I think this advertisement is in some way most of the telling things you can see what has happened. It would have been odd, in my mind, if the Speaker of a democratic parliament buys an advertisement in New York Times defending the Prime Minister of a country. That would be very odd. But buying a whole side in New York Times defending the man who is not the Prime Minister, but everyone knows acts like a Prime Minister, saying that he's not acting like a Prime Minister, but when he does it, that's right. That is extremely obscure. And I think it's important to state that everyone shall be equal in front of the law. And I can imagine there have been wrongs from all sides in the society. That is what is happening in all societies. But there is no doubt that there is a selective justice going on for quite a long time in Georgia. And I think a problem, if we're looking back, that I don't think that the European Union has been clear enough about this. The special envoy, Thomas Hammarberg, didn't react on this in the way I think he should have done. In reality, he became an excuse for the present power to proceed with the selective justice. I have spoken with the judges in the Supreme Court and with a lot of people. I have read what ministers in government have said about the procedure of the rule of law, saying that if you don't stand down, more people will be prosecuted. This is not an acceptable development. I remember when Mr. Saakashvili was in European Parliament in Strasbourg. I think it was the first time he visited. That was some year or years after 2004, when a number of new countries had entered the European Union, and we at that time spoke about New Europe and Old Europe. And he was making the case that Georgia is not Old Europe, it is Old Europe. I think that's an important point. From my perspective and from the EPP group and from EPP, it's very important to support our friends in UNM. Not because you're UNM, but because you have the rights to be defended, and because we are defending the future of Georgia as good as we can. I think you mentioned, Roland, in the beginning of this meeting, 1989. I think that's a good point of departure for the thought and analysis, because I think we are in somewhere in the years of 89, 1991. I remember when the Soviet troops reoccupied the capital of Lithuania in January 1991. It was a cold night of January, and people were standing around the parliament. And Vytautas Landsbergis was inside the parliament. And in those days, no one knew which direction we should head, what was to happen. And I think the same goes for what is now going on. We don't know what will happen. Early today, we in European Parliament voted yes to the agreement with Moldova. I think that's an important achievement. Interesting to see that the far right, or the extremists, or what you can call it, they were against. And the communists were against. They have a genetic loyalty to Moscow, whoever rules them. But what this implies is another thing. The discussion about Georgia, I'm sorry to say, is not only about Georgia. It is about a broader pattern about how Europe is to develop in what we call the Eastern neighborhood. By the way, Roland, I think that one of the great values of the Eastern Partnership, which must be seen also versus the shortcomings, is the fact I don't think we would have been sitting here discussing this issue if we didn't have the framework of Eastern Partnership and the discussion and the responsibility that created. I think that's important to remember. I think in some way the most important thing that is happening now is not what is happening in eastern Ukraine. That is extremely important. We have seen the last weeks what must be more or less 1 or 2 brigades of Russian armor entering over the borders to eastern Ukraine. And the most important thing is, of course, not in the same line, what I'm going to say, it's not what is happening in Georgia, South Ossetia, or the destabilization versus Moldova, which we would see being increased. The most important thing is what is happening in Moscow. What sort of conclusions will those and he who rules in Moscow draw from the reactions the world around? And from my point of view, there is a number of things that we need to do, because I think this is a conflict of, this is about the willpower from both sides. And first of all, I think this is extremely important that European Union is clear about, first of all, each country who is a member of the European Union is a part of the European Union. I say this because there is a lot of destabilization and threats versus member states of Europe. But also to clarify that the whole framework of Eastern Partnership is a framework for democracy and development in Europe. And we need to defend each and any country who is trying to develop rule of law and democracy. I think sometimes it's ridiculous when Mr. Putin says that he feels threatened by his neighbors. Not at all, but I can tell you what he's threatened about. is threatened about democracy in his neighborhood. Is threatened by rule of law in the neighborhood. And we must stick to that and defend that as far as possible, which means that we shall proceed with cooperation with all the countries who are sticking to this line. We must remember what happened in Ukraine, which is very important, because the development in Ukraine is a result of the fear in Moscow. It was good when Yanukovych was there and things were under control, and then it was a very clear, to put it mildly, demonstration of the will of the people, and things happened because the people of Ukraine wanted the free trade agreement. And that's why I would say that we must balance very carefully regarding Georgia, because I want us to have this trade agreement with Georgia. But I want it also to be very clear that there is a Georgia and there is a Georgia. A Georgia that is eliminating the hope of a government, or where the rulers are eliminating the hope for a development with democracy and rule of law, must in some way wait, and there is somewhere a turning point. I think that's important to know for he who is not in power but who rules, but also for Mr. Upashvili and for all others. They are risking to lose a lot for the citizens, which can also, let's not forget that dimension, create the same development as we saw in Ukraine when Yanukovych sold out. And this is an extremely difficult balance. But I think one thing that ties this together is firmness, and that we are standing together. I think it's an old American expression. We need to hang together because otherwise we will all hang together. But I think it's important that we are firm together. It's important to say that you are with us and we are firm together. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these clear words, Gunnar. I just can't help asking one follow-up question. If more for more means also less for less, which is, in a way, one of the points that you made, won't this drive the current Georgian leadership maybe even further into the arms of Moscow? Isn't by being firm, and that means it at times also withholding assistance, cooperation, help, isn't that going to make things even worse? Is the EU not in a hopelessly weak negotiating position vis-à-vis any government of the partnership countries in the current geopolitical context?
Yes, you're right, and that's why this is a very difficult balance. But you can also say that you use the phrase that we will push into the arms of Moscow. The problem is that he who is not having any power is probably doing some of these things by himself already. And this is a problem because, you know, there are a number of difficult or wrong things you can do. Because if you accept that developing in Georgia, whatever is happening, then you're turning out the lights. Because then they can do whatever they want. And then our friends will be objects for even more and harsher selective justice. I mean, we have reacted very much to the selective justice we have seen. But of course, I can feel that the selective justice can be much more brutal and much more of a totally different magnitude. I mean, this is the part of the balancing trick. And I think the important thing is neither of us can know and should know when a turning point is. But we shall know that there is a turning point. Because otherwise, we will let loose all the world's forces in the party behind, or in front, or along, even if we. But I think, from my point of view, this is extremely important to listen to the advice and the views from our Georgian friends.
Yes. Georgian friends who want to come in briefly on this, we'll start with Georgi, then we continue with Giga, then we have a short contribution by Eka, Fraser, and yeah, we're already opening up. But first, our panelists.
Just very quickly, it's a very legitimate question. It's not the first time we hear it. We would confidently argue that, in fact, the opposite is true. That it is precisely by not being clear on these developments that Georgia will be gradually drifting towards arms of Mr. Putin. Because Georgia is in a very peculiar situation. You have a very strong factor, the public opinion, very strong pro-European consensus in the society. So signals that are generated here have tremendous impact on the whole sort of situation, and nobody can ignore that. Even Mr. Ivanishvili, even the pro-Russian people in his coalition cannot ignore it. And of course, the UNM still strong opposition that attacks or criticizes the government from the pro-Western perspective. So the worst case scenario is gradual deterioration of situation under this overall picture that is overall okay, but gradually things go worse and worse, and then you have dramatic events like Ukraine. Our objective is not to allow that happen.
Thanks to Georgi, I have not much to add. I think that is the major point, but I had a point on one previous issue, if I may, because Mr. Filion raised this problematic issue about informing the public and countering the soft power of Russia, which we see through this ideology of demonizing Western choice and labeling pro-European choice as a threat to traditional values and to Georgian identity in this case, which we have seen in Georgia and elsewhere. One small point, I agree this is a very important thing, though I wouldn't worry about only that if there would be no Russian hard power in package. But in our case, the trouble is when ruling party and government contributes to that. When a vice speaker of the parliament says that if Europe forces me to become lesbian, I will resist. It is funny. This is funny when we talk here, but it is not so funny when it's in a context of everyday violence and when those groups are affiliated with the ruling party and they beat up people on the streets. And then they gain political initiative, and then the ruling party plays with this issue. This is the road to Russia. And it cannot be, you said that there'll be more reaction when the situation is more clear. Let's make sure that it's not too late, when it will be absolutely clear, but things will be, many people have mentioned Yanukovyization. I have spoken myself about that in domestic debate on the international arena, but to make it very clear, Georgian nation's role, our role as democratic opposition, is not to allow that to go to the degree where there was a sacrifice needed to preserve Georgian and Ukrainian sovereignty and to open the eyes to some of very good people in the West with good intentions who were refusing to see what was the problem. Now, in Georgia, we have advantages that there was much stronger political class consensus on pro-European choice. So it's much harder for anybody in Georgia to openly go against it because you have up to 80% support. You have a coalition which until very recently had elements which were clearly pro-European, at least elements, and you have a very strong pro-European opposition. But if we just calmly observe a dismantling of pro-European opposition, a dismantling of elements of the ruling coalition which were pro-European, a rise of the rhetoric, a rise of the groups which will push us to that, well, maybe in a year, in 2 years, there'll be a moment when, in package with external security threats, there'll be a cheap, from my point of view, but sometimes effective populism saying, look, we should accept the realities. We've heard this argument before. The reality is that we should go north because this is a natural sphere of influence. And then, of course, Georgian people will react to that and will not accept that, but this won't be a peaceful and rosy scenario. So we better prevent that scenario before through democratic means. And when I say democratic means, I mean clear signals from here. And on big, it's a challenging choice, as you said. So we ratify the association agreement, so we as a party support it call on our friends to do it, and how does it, what kind of signal it sends in light of all this troubling developments? Very good question, which means very tough question, but I think it's still doable and it's possible. On one hand, to reward Georgian nation. On the other hand, to package this positive step with very strong message. Not equivoking and saying some concerns or something, but very strong message that if there is no reversal, there'll be a challenge for further integration. Because that is the truth. That's not because somebody chooses so in Brussels, but that's by nature of events, there'll be no further European integration. But it must be made quite clear publicly because, as I said, Georgia, biggest force that we, those who want Georgia to be truly European, have is public opinion. So thank you.
Well, I think this, just to interrupt here briefly, I think this is the essential point, is that what I presented before as a dilemma of the European Union now, what leverage do we have? We want to prevent Georgia from turning north, and at the same time we want to demonstrate to the government that we have some levers still at our disposal. That's the point. It's the most dynamic part of the Georgian population that still wants to go west and not north. And that should be, so focusing on civil society, which is also a big topic of our visiting fellow Salome Samadashvili's paper, Lifeline for Freedom on Eastern Partnership 2.0. This is the decisive point, is that we have to work with the societies, not only the governments. But okay, having said that, we continue in our list, and Ekat Keshelashvili, formerly Foreign Minister and now President of the Georgian Institute for Strategic Studies, you have the floor, and go ahead.
I won't be repetitive of many things that I've subscribed to in terms of the analysis of the current situation. And then public opinion is an essential factor in Georgia, and I fully subscribe to that. And I think the European Union forget to speak about from the position of strength in so many ways, in so many parts of the world, that it underestimates its strength in the countries like Georgia, where public opinion matters, where due to all the work and transformation that the previous government has done with the help of the Georgian public in Georgia, social fabric is different and is used to be active in a different way, it's not passive. So when it comes to the essentials and fundamentals, they are not passive and they are resilient. So ambiguity from the side of the EU about what happens and about clarity, what are the conditions for actual deliverables of the success within the framework of the approximation with the EU of Georgia, is the biggest mistake. I mean, it's this ambiguity or deniability by that of the actual developments in the country keeps public not ignorant, but then much more acceptive to the line of the government that actually there is nothing wrong that is happening, because look, even the EU is not really clear about that. It's questionable issue, and then the progress is still coming. One speak about the signature, one speak about the ratification. So clarity about the issues that merit to be clearly defined is the key for the EU to maintain the position of strength, and then the position from which we actually can succeed further with more success rather than failures and backtracking. And here I come to the main point that I wanted to touch. It's the media freedoms. It's the space through which discussion, public engagement, and all of this information sharing possibility and activity of the public could come together, and it's the fundamental for that. On surface, it looks like it's a better place where we are rather than any other country of the post-Soviet space, except for Baltics, obviously. But then if you go deeper, it's a very vulnerable position in which we are. The biggest target right now for the government is the biggest television in Georgia, Rustavi 2, which is the only financially sustainable media outlet in Georgia, which government is very uncomfortable about. And then in every open doctrine type of the statements that the former or current prime minister or the leadership of the coalition are making, they specifically target the television. Then my line is that because of Rustavi 2, we can't give the truth to the public, which means that we can't control the information flow in a way that we would be comfortable with the way how public thinks about developments of the situation. And if we speak about the preventative line of what can keep Georgia on the track of the rightful development, what could be the chance for democracy as a space for that to have in the society, media is key. And then in that sense, much more clear engagement from the side of the EU or from the side of the member states as well as a preventative action, so the government is not successful in closing up the free space in Georgia is key. And again, with the same perception of things being better in Georgia and the media freedoms, this is the issue which is frequently, if not always, overlooked. We just recently had the special representative of OSCE for media freedoms visiting Georgia. She even didn't find the time to meet the media representatives in Georgia, just meeting with the government representatives. So in that sense, it's a big question to me. What do we do to make sure that political opposition, civil society, they have the voice that can be heard by the public in Georgia in this whole wave of attack and crackdown of the freedom, space, and pluralism in the country? And I would say that for the EU, that should be the key issue right now, to make sure that we don't close up those spaces. And there are clear indications of that. Physical attacks on the company in terms of the eavesdropping, criminal prosecution against the general director that has been initiated initially, and now the big talk about ownership rights for the company. So the bad feeling the company has that they might be just even closed up as a media outlet if the government would think that it's a necessity to have. So that's a key issue that has been a bit of a missing in the conversation, and I wanted to add to have an understanding of what to expect and what should be done in the country.
Thank you very much. I now have 4 more people on the list, and I suppose that we just go around the table and then maybe have a series of answers from the panel. So far, I think we were all more or less in agreement, but I hope for some dissent now from Fraser Cameron.
Yeah, thanks, Roland. Well, certainly I'll bring in some dissent just for the flavor of a debate rather than just a discussion. I mean, firstly, don't overestimate what the EU can do in external relations. Our record is not very good unless we're actually dealing with countries on an enlargement perspective. But, we've been unable to resolve the debate. Macedonia, we've been unable to resolve Cyprus, we've been unable to resolve Kosovo, so don't think that we can do things outside the immediate neighborhood when enlargement is not on offer. And we've made big mistakes on enlargement. We set criteria for Bulgaria and Romania and failed to actually implement them. We still are dealing with a problem country in Hungary, where there are serious violations of democratic principles, and we're struggling how to deal with it. So we're not very good in this area. Civil society is important, yes, but our track record, both on the EU-Russia civil society, which I've been involved in for many years, is poor, and the track record on Eastern Partnership civil society is also very poor. Sadly, often these NGOs simply don't want to cooperate with each other, and that's the reality we have to deal with. Having said that, I agree with Gunnar that the European partnership has actually was a very good framework, good structure, many positive things. And we say in English, you can take the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. We can't force these countries to go down the track, but you can set out a framework, and I think it's the right framework for these countries. Now, the coalition was always going to break up. It was never going to hold. So, but it's broken up now. I don't think that Alessandro, someone said, was described as a traitor. He was praised by the Prime Minister for his contribution to the government. Hopefully there will be new parties formed and there will be realignments. This goes on everywhere. I don't see it as an automatic, drift towards an authoritarian regime that's going to run off to Russia. I think we need more evidence for that at all. I think too that the key questions now are, what's the leverage, as Roland said, that the EU has? And it is a problem that we have to set out, and this will happen probably on Monday. I can imagine there'll be some tough questions for the Prime Minister and his team here. What exactly one is going to do in particular situations, and we've discussed some of them here relating to the economy, media, civil society. But there have been a lot of independent assessments. I mean, I think you were rather overcritical of Hammerberg, whom I know quite well. I don't think he was simply an alibi function for what went on there. There's been several international judges there who've got very high reputations in many of our member states and abroad, who've gone and observed proceedings and have basically said things are okay. So one can over-dramatize what has actually happened in the last couple of weeks here. And I think one needs rather more evidence to say this is an automatic drift. So what does the UN want to do now in terms of domestic politics? Do they want early elections? Is that one possible scenario that they would like? Or do they simply want to say, the EU, you must deal with it?
very pertinent questions. I interrupt here. Next is Olaf Wiecek on the list, that Gunnar wanted to come in directly on Fraser's statements.
Yes, I think I would like to, because to put it mildly, I disagree with you. One can over-dramatize, of course, but one can also under-dramatize. And I think maybe you're doing that mistake. I have seen what has been said from Prime Minister Saakashvili, ministers in that government, that is not acceptable for any government to say. But I have also seen that there is a clear link from what they have said into real action. I have spoken with people in the Supreme Court who unwillingly note that they have been pressed on for selective justice. I have seen that people are jailed in an appropriate way, whatever they have done. They get sentences, or not even sentences, but pre-trial detention that is not proportionate in any country. But what I mainly disagree with you is when you say that we have no leverage, because the interesting thing is we're on both equal level in that issue, because I can tell you neither you nor I know that, because we don't know, first of all, what would have happened otherwise. That is the contradictory, very difficult thing to argue about. But the second thing is the whole fact that the European Union, whatever one can think about it, and whatever we can say that we should be stronger, be aiming to do more, we are still seeing that there is an attraction center around this European Union, which is formative, what is happening in the countries of Balkan. But they are, of course, due to their rifts and conflicts. But still, it sets an agenda. I heard a lot of people express the same view as you did in the 80s about the Baltic states and Poland. What can we do about them? But I know, and I knew people there, and they said that they were their oxygen and their support, knowing that there was leverage, and knowing that they were seen, and knowing that there was a policy opening up Europe for them. And it did have a tremendous effect. So don't underestimate, don't under-dramatize. Let's see the picture as it is. That's a very good point of departure.
Okay, yeah, okay, Giga, come in on this, and then we continue with the list.
I'll be very brief. I want to agree with Mr. Fraser on one thing. Departure of 3 ministers, or even a crisis within the cabinet of this agreement, is not a crisis of democracy at all, per se. The trouble is if the reason of this crisis and continuation of this crisis is the Prime Minister coming out on TV and saying, you'll have more surprises with investigations ahead of time, 1. 3, I'm sorry that Mr. Fraser has been deeply misinformed, and it's very easy to check. Prime Minister have labeled Mr. Alsania stupid adventurer traitor. Then he met ambassadors where he praised him. So it's kind of late Mr. Arafat tactics, different messages in English and Arabic, yeah? Condemning violence in English, but not in Arabic. So I can provide you with a very good source, which is Civil G, which always is very correct and up-to-date, not politicized, to be properly informed. So what is the problem, whether there will be an early elections or not? The problem in any case is that the person who has no formal position and who happens to have 6 billion, which is 1/3 of the GDP, should not be able to tell the prosecutor whom to put to jail. That's the problem, not whether there will be an early elections or not, 1. And 2, it's a problem when political leadership plays with hatred for political purposes on sectarian grounds in a country which has been exposed security-wise in that direction quite deeply in the past. And 3, you said that there were some reports in Hamburg, report, and so we should look at independent assessment of the situation. I agree. So far, the cases which were raised in Georgia have been checked in a couple of cases in European courts, not the Strasbourg Court of Human Rights yet. But wherever these cases which were described by the government on highest level as rock solid, which by itself is a problem, PM talks about rock solid proof of guilt all the time, yeah, or when former foreign minister declared all the previous government officials are criminals and guilty. far ahead when even formal cases started. But a couple of cases went to the European Court. So one of the previous defense ministers of Georgia was detained in France on the request of the Georgian government for extradition, and there was a several months court case with in-depth, litigation and French judicial system, which I think you and others will agree is stronger than Georgian judicial system. It ended up with quite atypical result. And atypical was not in a sense that countries like Georgia can be refused by judiciary for extradition on various grounds, including political suspicions. But in this case, the prosecutor came out publicly in an open court case says that he's dropping the case, the one that you should follow it, because the case demonstratively lacks any evidence and is also transparently politically motivated. So again, it's not us or anybody biased, but I'm talking about the European institution with some tradition of independence, stronger than our tradition. Same about other instances in all European countries, the extradition was refused due to the lack of evidence. So we have both technical data and common sense tests that things are deeply wrong in Georgia in the last 2 years. And if we just pretend that it's just one blip, it will be just pretending that there's no problem. And yes, EU has a very strong leverage in Georgia, and it's not a situation like some situations in Balkans. In Georgia, so far, we have a very strong, as I said, public opinion. So far, we have, at least on declarative level, all the political forces committed to European choice. And it's very hard for anybody, even the one with 6 billion, to openly confront it. He can erode this choice step by step. He cannot take it by outright assault. And our goal is not to give him a chance to erode this step by step. Thank you.
Thank you. Olaf Winczek. And please, would you just, from now on, everyone introduce themselves with a brief sentence?
Thank you. Olaf Winczek from the European Office of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. 3 issues. Firstly, coming back to what you just said regarding the pro-European consensus, which is stronger now, according to polls, than it is in Moldova, and which is stronger than it ever was in Ukraine, if I'm not mistaken. But regarding the long-term factor, what role may the church play? I mean, representatives of the church have sometimes been a bit ambivalent regarding the pro-European future of Georgia. They have not, as far as I know, been totally against, but they have made ambivalent statements, especially given the fact that I think the most popular personality in Georgia is still Patriarch Ilya. That's the first issue. The second issue is the stability of the government. We have seen the Free Democrats withdraw. We have seen the independent, 12 independent MPs joining. Now it is, before it was a 6-party coalition, now it is even more complex than that. So how sustainable, in your opinion, is this really as a construct? And adding up to that, as a third remark or question, we have seen weakening of Mr. Alassania's position basically since the beginning of the government, if I'm not mistaken. So I think he was discouraged to run for the presidential elections. Now he has been sacked. Now his party withdrew from the coalition. What with the, let's say, other, maybe most pro-European party in this coalition, the Republican Party? What is its position now, and what further developments can we expect regarding other personalities which have been a bit more critical towards government politics, such as the president, for example, in the past?
Okay, these were direct questions, but nevertheless, we continue in the list. Yes, okay. That means I still have 4 people on the list, and we take them all in 5, okay, in succession. Please be extremely brief, because we only have slightly over 15 minutes left now. Now, next on the list is the gentleman. It's already done. Fantastic. Salome, go ahead.
Thank you. Salome Samadashvili, visiting fellow Martens Centre, former Georgian ambassador to the EU. My question concerns, we are placing a very large bet on public opinion in Georgia, and it was already mentioned, the factor of the church. I want to bring in two important factors. One is the economy and economic welfare of the citizens. Second is the soft power or the information space in Georgia, which now is basically invaded by the Russian channels. We're hearing every day about the new sort of operation of the Russian propaganda, which has been given the chance to enter the Georgian information market. But I have also a question for the ES representative, because you have mentioned that you have applauded the Georgian government on implementation of the agreements, but the economic, sort of figures are not very promising. In fact, Georgian exports to the European markets have gone down, while the exports to the Russian markets have increased. Now Russia is the fourth biggest trading partner of Georgia. So it seems that while Georgia has this DCFTA, the current Georgian government has no idea what to do with this DCFTA. So in a few years' time, if we look at the public opinion in a sort of longer term, if these agreements with the European Union have absolutely no impact on the well-being of the Georgian citizens, I think it will be very difficult to continue arguing for the case for Europe, while they are also increasingly more exposed to the Russian propaganda machinery. And you have mentioned that you want to step up the EU's efforts to influence the public opinion in Georgia. Could you give us a few examples of concrete initiatives that you think are particularly efficient to this end? Thank you.
Thank you. We continue with two ladies straight ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Tatia Doliza, research assistant at the Center for European Policy Studies, SEPS, Brussels. I would have a question to Mr. Rudy Filan about the future of the Eastern Partnership. Well, you mentioned that Georgia and Moldova are in the top league of the Eastern Partnership, and actually it's a very important observation of yours, as it further emphasizes the already obvious fact that the Eastern Partnership got divided into two parts, like first and second class passengers, with Belarus, Azerbaijan and Armenia lagging behind, and we have Moldova, Ukraine and Georgia in this top league, as you mentioned. Well, I would like to ask you, as it's an obvious fact of Eastern Partnership policy got this two-track direction, is it actually a success of the Eastern Partnership, or is it a challenge to this very essence of this regional policy? Because if then it goes down to the bilateral agreements, in the end, what's the sense of having the Eastern Partnership project at all? And maybe that fact is also depriving Eastern Partnership those regional tools with which it was addressing the problems. Thank you.
Thank you. There was, yes, lady next to you.
So my name is Elena Boroda. I'm a Georgian German journalist with the European. Now, three issues I'd like to raise. So the first one is, it ties in with the remark by Mr. Hökmark about the PR effort of Georgian Dream of Ivanishvili abroad. And the question would be to Badano Giga and Badano Georgi, in how far do you think you can match up with this PR effort abroad and also inside the country? Second question is the symbolism of the Berlin Wall. I've just completed a documentary about the Berlin Wall, about the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I asked myself the question, in how far is the Rose Revolution does it match up with the symbolism of the Berlin Wall, or is it something we have to kind of wait for the sequel? The third question I have is standing firmly together. So does the European Union is there enough flesh to the bone to the Eastern Partnership as well as to the association agreement to kind of compete with a very geopolitical approach on the side of Russia? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Two more persons. Yes, the gentleman in the corner. Sorry, I have to close the list at some point.
Georgi Ontadze, student at College of Europe. So far, we've been talking about the internal aspects of threats that Georgia has towards the Western path. And I have a question to Mr. Filon. What about the external aspects? For example, the new type of integration agreement with Abkhazia, and what is the EU stance? Or are there any discussions about this type of, and what will be the consequences? What will be the reaction of the EU? And also, I would like to ask Mr. Georgi Kandelaki, Is there any type of collaboration, I mean, in the parliament or in the government, with Georgian Reforms Association about the anti-annexation strategy? Thank you.
And the last question goes to Christian.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Christian Faulkner, Seidel Foundation. First, I want to thank Tom Roland and Mr. Höckmark for 2 points. First, we need more information on what's going on. That's a good event, what you have. Second, Mr. Höckmark, we made it very clear, we want the region to develop in a democratic way, the rule of law, according to our expectations and to our values. And you gave a very firm commitment to this. But the concrete questions, Georgi, the first to you. What is it now, how to assess the resigning the ministers? Is it good or is it bad? And the second question, Giga, to you. What are the driving forces in foreign policy? Is it value-driven or are the business interests connected? What Salome indicated, trade with Russia, business interests, big oligarchs behind the scene. So are the driving forces of foreign policy business-oriented or is it a value-driven foreign policy?
Thank you very much. Now that's a lot of homework for us, that it will be difficult to select. So please don't all of you answer all of these questions, because that will mean we'll sit here until 6. So Giga, I start with you. There were a couple of concrete questions also about the future, the intended future. What are your plans in Georgia?
I'll try this time really to be brief, but I connect the questions because Salome said that we are betting too much on public opinion. I understand what her point is, and the question was about the church, which is the most popular institution in Georgia. It is true, the church and the idea of Orthodox brotherhood with Russia and Orthodox values being under threat has been used by those forces who want to shift Georgia's geopolitical course and inside course. It has been done quite transparently. Unfortunately, it has found some significant sympathy within the clergy. But it's impossible and very risky for anybody to be openly against the European idea, even for the most popular clergy people, for the same reason which I already twice mentioned. Are we betting too much faith on this? Well, that's the only faith we can have in democracy, that we can hope that this will protect us, with active players in political and social life trying to strengthen what we think is our defense, and our opponents are trying to weaken what is our defense. So this public opinion is being targeted by the ideas that I described. So it's on 2 different layers. Most of Georgians are traditional, are conservative when it comes to the ideas of respect to church, but they are at the same time very clear about where they want to go. Now, if our adversaries manage to use this another very strong layer against the idea of Georgians belonging to Europe, that's their victory. And our goal is to use the public opinion with some shallow positions that we have there on some value issues to protect our European future. Now, it's easy to say, hard to do, but that's our goal. Will we match up to the PR effort? I mean, domestically, we are all for competition, and if we're allowed to have it from outside the jail. So PR from the jail is not an easy option when it comes to election. As for outside, I think that kind of PR, every government should be interested in promoting its image outside. It's the interest of the country, sometimes of the government and economy. But the example that Mr. Höckmark brought, I think, is deeply troubling because it's a paid advertisement for an open article, which is highly unusual, to say at least open, because governments can have paid articles for information about the country. I mean, what are the taxes, how good it is to invest, but an article by a political figure defending a billionaire who happens to be de facto controller in a paid article, this is a very bad advertisement for the country. Very bad, because it shows that there is something deeply wrong, especially if now the suspicions are confirmed that the money which was spent on it was public money. So public money was used to defend somebody who is not the public, and they attack its opponents. So on that sphere, I don't really even want to participate in that competition. And domestically, we are all up to competition, provided there is minimal equal ground. What will happen with coalition? They are safe, technically speaking, now, number-wise. So there'll be no instability in that sense of the word, that there'll be a vote of no confidence or something. It's another issue when some controversial bills will come into play, which happens very frequently these days. How much mobilization they can have, what will certain components will do. It will be a troubling period for the government for sure in that sense. And I'm troubled that their response to this democratic trouble will be further repression. And that's our goal. Republicans and president, I don't know. So far, they have a very awkward position. They wanted to have it both ways. They want to stay in coalition and share friendship with Free Democrats, which is, makes no sense. President made some good statements recently, has been forced to be a bit more proactive by humiliating campaign against him. He recently said that country should not be ruled from the shadow, but then he was pressured and he walked back and he said he did not mean Mr. Ivanishvili on that. So there is some more shadows behind the leader, which we might not know. I don't know, maybe I'm missing some authentic question. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll try to answer some questions. Whether I'll start from the end. Whether these resignations or sacking are good or bad. Well, as it has been noted, coalitions collapse and things happen, in more established democracies. But what is important here is that these events highlight a tendency which is per se bad, which is what I started with, the informal rule and abuse and instrumentalization of criminal justice system. And provided this is the result or consequence of these systemic developments, from that perspective, it is, of course, very bad. Who is driving the foreign policy? Let me pick up on that, of the Georgian Dream. Now, with the departure of the foreign policy team, that's a very interesting question. We have had a general trend within the ruling coalition, and these resignations have been a part of that, a confirmation of that, which was the increasing marginalization of the pro-Western components of the coalition and empowerment of the anti-Western core, I would say, is the Georgian Dream and the Georgian Dream Party. And so in Parliament, for example, Mr. Giavolsky, who is really the de facto chairman of Parliament, he's a Communist Party veteran, high official in the Communist Party, very likely linked with the KGB. He's sort of calling the shots in Parliament. And so people like him, I expect them to be even more influential than they were before. And you were right when you said that the marginalization of Al-Assad started virtually from the very beginning. Whether we saw Rose Revolution as part of the sort of the same wave as the Berlin Wall, yes, we liked to see Rose Revolution and our efforts to bring reform or modernization and democracy to Georgia as, let's say, our efforts to join on that wave of enlargement of the free world later. Very unfortunately, Georgia didn't feature in the paradigm of reunification of Europe for technical reason that Georgian earlier experiment with Europe was very short, unlike the Baltic states, 20 years, in Georgia's case, 3 years, middle, quite very tragic as well. But we philosophically see Georgia part of that space, and so yes, that was our hope. But also one can draw another parallel that in many comparable countries, when reformers lost, in many countries there was a backlash. So the attempts in this way or that way to reverse reforms, but then reformers would return. So we hope that in whatever way, it doesn't have to be us, but we hope it will be us, that Georgia will repeat that cycle as well, and this backsliding will be sort of brought to a halt on anti-annexation strategy. Yes, we took that on board, and in fact, that's one of the criticisms, major criticism towards the government, that it's unable, due to its flawed policy towards Russia, to respond to the ongoing annexation of Abkhazia.
Thank you.
I do indeed have a few items left here. External policy. Do we have a good track record? I can only say we are 28 countries. We have a foreign affairs representative only for the past 3 years. We just had a new incumbent coming into office, and I'm sure we can we will consistently make efforts to do better and better there. The Association Council, I already mentioned this, next Monday, will be a perfect opportunity to raise the things that we have been talking about here, including, for instance, media freedom. I think that is a very important point, and I am sure we will not miss the opportunity to ask some tough questions here, including on selective justice, including on the fact that it was reported in the media that the Prime Minister said that he had personally reviewed evidence, for instance. Now, that is unheard of in a situation where you want to have the separation of powers. That goes completely against. Now, on the EU soft power, what are we going to do in terms of public relations? I think nothing too innovative, but we have to use all the channels that we have, including outreach, including using multipliers through think tanks, through universities, for instance. I believe, having worked for quite a while in academic cooperation, that promoting more Georgian students to study in the EU, for instance, offer more opportunities. You foster the best ambassadors possible by doing these kind of things. Public diplomacy is another strand of activity that we should fully use. The point was made that the DCFTA has so far not produced results. Well, the DCFTA is being provisionally applied from the 1st of September only, so I think that is maybe not an entirely fair comment. We expect that in the longer run, it will have the full implementation of the DCFTA will have an impact of about 4% in 4 percentage points of additional growth on the economy. Why is there currently more trade going to Russia? This is a result of Moldova not being able to export to Russia for the moment, and the Georgian government has openly declared this is a great opportunity for our producers, for our exporters. Now, we were not entirely happy with this, and we have made a point about backfilling to them, but then, of course, it is a reality. Is there a kind of policy of two speeds in the two-speed policy in the Middle Eastern Partnership? I think it's a situation that has emerged as it is, and we should be dealing with the realities that there is quite a considerable diversity in the area, and that we deal with the countries as they move forward. And we should also, those who have the potential to move forward faster, we should give them that opportunity, and we should actually give them encouragement to do that. Whether the EU can compete with Russia, I don't think we are really competing with Russia. I don't think we are saying that we are better than Russia or whatever. I think it's much more important that at least we don't threaten. We don't occupy territory, we don't invade, we offer incentives, we offer, and that I think is most important, we offer a democratic alternative.
You're better than Russia.
I leave that to you. And then finally, the Abkhazia agreement, the Russian agreement proposed with Abkhazia. Definitely one of the points also on the agenda for Monday. A great point of concern. There has been an OSCE statement about this. The EU has made it very clear that we fully support the territorial integrity of Georgia, and we stand by the country. But we have not gone as far as the Georgian government wanted this by calling it a de facto annexation. But we have at least been very concerned about this, and we will continue to follow the situation.
Great, thank you very much. Gunnar, you have not only the last word, but you have -2 minutes to say it.
I will fill the role. I think the last stage there has been one expression that most of us have used, and that is totally wrong. and that is the expression, the fall of the Berlin Wall. Because it never fell. It was teared down. When you say the fall of the Berlin Wall, it implies that it just happened. It was teared down by the ideas and the will of thousands and thousands of people all over Europe. On the other side and on the other side. So I think it's important we ask for the parallel to 89. I don't think there are any parallels in history, but there are a lot of learnings. And I think there is a huge learning from 89. But in the end, it's extremely strong power of Soviet Union, East Europe, on it, all the services, etc. It sounds very naive or pathetic when I say this, or ideas. It was true. The will and ideas of people was stronger than tanks. Like Walesa was in Parliament one of the other days, and he just said that ideas were stronger than tanks. Not stronger than think tanks, of course, but stronger than tanks. And I think this is the great learning that we need to do. May I just, because we sometimes say, what can EU do, etc. European Union is a democratic member states. We don't do anything without others. We open up opportunities. And Romania and Bulgaria was named earlier. I belong to those who think we were too fast with Romania and Bulgaria. But on the other hand, I supported the decision when we took it. Because there is always an alternative. And if Romania and Bulgaria had been members of the European Union today, we would have seen parallelities in Romania and Bulgaria to what now is going on in Ukraine. And there is a saying in Swedish that it's difficult to make forecasts, especially about the future.
That was Mark Twain.
Yes, but we use it in Sweden. And I think it was a Swede anyway. And let's think about in 2 years' time. Today is 2014. In 2 years' time, it will obviously be 2016. Things will be different. We don't know how, but we know that it depends on what is done and not done. If we don't do anything, some others will do. If we do the things we can, that will influence. To what extent, we don't know. And it will have an impact on the future. And that's the only thing we can do and learn from 89.
Okay, normally I would have to now give you an elaborate summary of this whole thing, which would be as long as our discussion itself. But no, thanks to Gunnar, he already said the final words. No, but I leave you with three points about what we came up with here. First of all, this is not just a government crisis. There is a backslide. It's systemic, but it's not irreversible. Second, the EU is maybe not as weak as it looks for the moment. It still has some strong cards on its hands, and those, of course, refer to public opinion, civil society, and not only the government in Georgia. And third, this is not just about Georgia. This is not just about Eastern Europe. This is not just about Russia itself, which was mentioned at the beginning, but this is also about us. This is about the West. This is about the Euro-Atlantic institutions, EU and NATO, and their sustainability in the future. So we're not talking about a faraway country about which we know little, but we're talking about our common future. Thank you very much.